close this tab. Okie dokie. Welcome, ladies. Have I stopped sharing my screen? No. Before we record, Kamkhelo. Got it. Can we all see my screen? Welcome to Courageous. Can we all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes,
we can start recording. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy International Women's Day. And we welcome you to Courageous Women Arise. This is the first international, the first International Women's Day was held in March 8, 1911, right? This is an ancient celebration. IWD is not a country, it's not a group, it's not organization specific. It is a day of collective global activism and celebration that belongs to all those committed to forging women's equality. The story of women's struggle for equality belongs to no single organization, but to the collective efforts of all who care about human rights. The campaign theme for International Women's Day 2024 is Inspire Inclusion. And so we celebrate as we come, when we inspire others to understand and value women's inclusion, we forge a better world. Welcome, women. Welcome to each and every one of you, and happy International Women's Day. We are so happy that you could join us today. We would like to know where you're coming from. You can put on the chat where you're coming from. We're good to record the session as we start. We are so glad that you could join us this morning. So let us kick in. Who is Courageous Women? A bit about us before we deep dive. So as you know, a bit about us, we are women living on mission to support, encourage, and empower each other as we courageously arise to serve God's purposes in our sphere of influence and leadership. This is where we see that we are raising the Esthers of our days, as it says in Esther 4:14. Who knows that you are in that sphere of influence, in that position of leadership, wherever God has placed you for such a time as this? So how do you give yourself permission to arise and shine, for the glory of God rises upon you? And that's all we're all about. We are a community of women that are here to support you as you serve God's purposes wherever God has called you. Whether you are a stay-at-home mom or you are an executive, this is a collective of women coming together to encourage and empower each other to facilitate and serve God's purposes in our time. Just to check, are we recording for the purposes, are we recording on our site? Let me just check with the producer quickly.
Yes, we are.
Happiness. Cool. That's it. So let us then deep dive into today. Our agenda today will quickly look into the overview of the context of inclusive leadership, or inclusive, inspire inclusion from our context. We'll have our panelist keynotes, which is so exciting and I'm looking forward to. Then we'll have a panel discussion, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. We'll appreciate if you could put on the chat if you have questions as our panelists are presenting. Please feel free to put your questions on the chat, and we'll definitely have a Q&A at the end, and our producer is looking to capture all your questions so as we are able to facilitate that session when that time comes. So let's then deep dive into our theme and the context and our overview of what inclusive leadership looks like. Our theme as an organization, we're looking at our sub-theme in the bigger theme, so to say, in this webinar is inspiring. How does inspiring inclusive leadership liberate women and girls? And there are particular areas that we'll be focusing on in our talk today, or in our webinar today. But maybe let's first define what we mean by inclusion, right? Inclusion is an act of creating environments where everyone feels respected. Note, everyone feels respected and can feel respected and valued. Let me give more meat to what I'm talking about. Research tells us there are 4 factors of inclusion, which is belonging, uniqueness, equity, and non-discrimination. That is the bigger picture of what inclusion is. And we know right now that in many workplaces, organizations are focused on diversity, inclusion, and equity. And there is now positions around that. But what's the difference then between inclusion and diversity? I liked this statement. Diversity is a fact. We're looking at the numbers, but inclusion is an act. So how do we act to ensure that everyone feels respected and valued in wherever God has placed them or in their spheres of influence? That being said, now let's narrow this conversation down to our sub-theme of inclusive leadership. What is inclusive leadership? Inclusive leadership is a process of social influence that strives to value and respect everyone involved in achieving a goal. I like that definition, right? Because we acknowledge that we have a goal as a society, as an organization, but it takes everyone to feel valued and respected. Their ideas, their contributions is valued and respected. That's what inclusive leadership is all about. And that's what an inclusive leader will strive to achieve. Now, let's take it in our context from our Christian faith. What does inclusive leadership look like, and how did Jesus model inclusive leadership? Let me take you back in history so as you understand a context of how women were dealt in the days of Jesus and how he modeled inclusive leadership. In the 1st century, women were inferior and of no little value in all areas of life. In the daily prayers of Jews, there was a threefold thanksgiving. 1, praise be God that he has not created me a Gentile, meaning I am at least a Jew. Praise be God that he has not created me a woman. How shocking is that? Praise be God that he had not created me an ignorant man. These were the prayers the men in the context of Jesus used to make when they were praying. And so we see Jesus coming into the scene. Jesus lived in a context in which women were seen as inferior, evil agents of sin, and cursed. Their sole value was procreation. Otherwise, they were to be avoided at all costs. We see so many Bible narratives where Jesus restores the dignity of women. How beautiful is that? That Jesus interacted with women on many levels, and this was seen revolutionary and countercultural. His attitude and actions toward Jewish, Gentile, sinful and ritually unclean women caused a great stir amongst his disciples, to the horror and the disgust of religious leaders. So with that being said, we see that Jesus brought a shift in how society back in those days saw women, included women, or valued women. So let us look into some of the key things that Jesus modeled as an inclusive leader. Number 1, we see that Jesus restored the dignity of women. According to Luke 13, verse 12, we see the woman who was bent down for 18 years, and he defied the laws of those days because he healed that woman on the Sabbath. And the leaders of the days were like, hi, how do you heal someone on the Sabbath? It was against the law. So he was the first to actually confront the law. And we are confronting every law today that is excluding women from being seen and being valued and being appreciated. He went out of his way, number 2, to interact with women. We see him interacting with a Samaritan woman at the well in John 4, verse 1. So we know that Samaritans were not part of the Jews. They were excluded and. So Jesus has a conversation with a woman at the well. We see again another point of inclusive leadership. He allowed women to be his disciples. The Bible tells us in Matthew 27:55, many women who had come from Galilee with Jesus came to take care of him when they were watching from a distance, even on the day when he was crucified. So women were part of Jesus's agenda. Women were central and were included in the agenda of Jesus Christ. And we also see again that Jesus came to redeem and restore women's value in their place in God's creation order. That is beautiful. And I'd like to quote the scripture in Galatians 3, verse 18. It says, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ. I am happy to say, women, as we celebrate International Women's Day, we are included in Christ. Our faith in Christ makes us inclusive. Jesus modeled what inclusive leadership looks like. Jesus modeled inclusion in every way. So to truly include women's, it means to openly embrace women's diversity of race, women's diversity, age, ability, faith, and body language, or body image rather, and everything that identifies women. That's why we are here today. We are included, and we are here to embrace your race, your age, your faith, and your body image. Welcome to Courageous Women Arise, and this is our webinar where we are celebrating International Women's Day. As I've already said, please feel free to put your comments on the chat. Let's make this interactive. We are mending the chat. Put your questions on the chat. Celebrate with us. This is a celebrating. We are standing on shoulders of giants. From 1911, the baton is handed over to us in 2024 to celebrate the inclusion of women in all spheres of life. With that said, I'm very excited to hand over this conversation to our panelists, and we're going to start our conversation today with embracing the young woman, Gabriella Bhima, who will be our first speaker for today. Please note, ladies, we have found, we got an apology from Athi Mbete. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us as planned, but that doesn't change the agenda. We're going to start our conversation, and we're going to have our keynote speaker. As I said, I am joined by distinguished guests. The first one, it will be Gabriella Bhima, who is a content creator, and later on we will have a women rights and gender studies specialist, Lindelwe Nxumalo, who will talk about the advancement of women programs through her presentation. So I'm going to hand over to Gabriella to take us off. We have young women, we have courageous young women arise that is already at hand. If you are young, you are vibrant, you are happening, or you have a daughter who's already a young woman who would like her to be part of this work, please we'll share our details at the end as I stop sharing the screen, so as Gabriella can share her screen. So let us welcome our young women, our young courageous woman who will be taking on and doing her keynote address on the topic of women, inclusive women in the creative industry for young women and girls. Over to you, Gabriella.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Auntie Tshepiso. I really appreciate it. So Auntie Tshepiso already introduced me. I'm Gabriella Bhima. Before I start, I just want to make sure, can everybody see my screen and hear and see me? Just so that we don't have any technical issues.
Yes, we can.
Do.
Awesome. Okay, so like Auntie Tshepiso very lovely, put it in a very lovely way, I'm Gabriella Bhima. So I'm a 21-year-old LLB student. I currently hold a BA Law. I am also an only child to a single mother, which means that women empowerment is not something that is new to me. It's something that I've seen throughout my life. And the reason why I'm here today is I'm also a content creator. So that means that I utilize digital platforms to create various types of content. My personal content is about my lifestyle and travel experiences, food I like, really anything that interests me. Something interesting about me is that I have a best friend. He was born with 4 legs, and his name is Crisco. He is the cutest boy you will ever see in your entire life, and I love him very much. So today we are here to talk about inclusion. We're here to talk about the promotion of women in the creative industry. And so I think before we start with how can we promote women, I think it's important to consider what inclusivity means. And, you know, as a believer as well, it's more than a concept to us. It is also a way of life. It's also a decision that you make consciously and something that you can find biblical proof of. And so when I consider inclusion, I consider that inclusivity not only means providing women with the same opportunities as men, but fostering a sense of belonging within those environments. I think women being given access to an environment is absolutely necessary, but in order to thrive in said an environment, I think it is necessary for women to feel as though they belong in that environment. Moreover, I think not only to belong, but to belong in their natural state. I think often as women, we are encouraged to change and adapt our environment, you know, be more aggressive, be more dominant. But I think to create a place where you don't need to change who you are, your personality or your identity to feel a sense of belonging. And I do believe this is a godly principle if we consider David when he stepped forth to confront Goliath in 1 Samuel 17. We read from verse 38, then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. I cannot go in these, he said to Saul, because I am not used to them. So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. From this scripture, I take that David did not belong in the armor. His power resided in his simple attire, sling and pebbles. And this is a very non-traditional image of a warrior, but it's only when David shed the armor and embraced his true self as he was ordained by God that he flourished. Only unencumbered could he fulfill his destiny. And I think similarly as women, our true power lies not in conforming to an ill-fitting armor, but in embracing our authentic selves. You know, we're called to be giant killers and yet given an armor that stifles us. And so I think practically that would look like being told to suppress your emotions, and yet it is empathy that fosters enduring connections, enhancing networking skills. So as such, inclusion for me looks like women being allowed to exist as we are called to exist, however that may look for each woman. If you are career driven, then you should be allowed to exist like that. If you're not and you enjoy more supposedly traditional feminine activities like baking or cooking, then you should be allowed to exist like that without the fear of judgment or condemnation. So today we're going to be discussing the transformative power of the creative industry and creative expression, and discovering how we can utilize these resources to unleash our full potential and make a lasting impact in the creative industry. So when we consider the creative industry, when I was younger, we used to watch movies on CDs, and now there's Netflix and YouTube and Disney Plus, and of course, social media now, which when I was younger, there was Mixit, I think. Now there's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and there's so many platforms for content creation and artist promotion. And today, digital innovation has a focus on diversity, inclusion, and sustainability within the creative industry. And so we really find ourselves in a landscape of boundless opportunity where individuals of all backgrounds, genders, and ethnicities are given a platform in which they can thrive. It's a space where Auntie Tshepiso was saying the corporate businesswoman and stay-at-home mother can both make significant impacts and belong. And so, of course, there are various benefits to the creative industry. Number one being that it is highly lucrative. If you consider, for example, South African Grammy winner Tyler, whose songs trended on TikTok before she became as successful as she is now, ultimately contributing to her subsequent success. Creators like 23-year-old Addison Rae, who would upload 30-second videos of her dancing in her bedroom and is now a multi-millionaire. And I think this is such an integral point on the creative industries. Once it's tapped, it is really an opportunity for immense financial success. Not only does the industry provide opportunities for financial success, but it doesn't take a substantial amount of time to become a viable financial hustle. It takes content creators an average of 6.5 months with consistent posting to earn their first dollar. Furthermore, the barrier to entry in the creative industry is lower than ever before, with AI-powered assistants such as ChatGPT, apps like Canva, even Instagram and TikTok themselves providing templates. You can generate ideas, create content, and even schedule uploads in a matter of minutes. Fourth, the creative industry offers unparalleled flexibility in terms of time management. You have the freedom to film and create content at your convenience. And this flexibility, I think, is particularly appealing to women who juggle multiple roles and responsibilities. If you consider yourself in your life, you are a daughter, you are maybe a sister, you are a mother, you are a grandmother, whatever your role is, you have definitely more than one of it. And I know that we are all striving to fulfill our roles with excellence. And so this provides you with an opportunity to fulfill all of the roles that you are called to fulfill in your life with excellence while still gaining some kind of financial success. The industry is also extremely broad with regard to opportunities for content. Right now, the most liked video on TikTok is a bowl of strawberries with chocolate on it. Then that's the whole video. It's about 15 seconds long, and it has about 250 million likes. And so you really don't know what people will want to watch. A lot of people like watching videos of people popping pimples, which I find disgusting, but to some people that's like, wow, I couldn't ask for better content. So there's really a place for everyone, whether you want to show your face or not. Not every opportunity in the digital industry is, hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I think there's a very, it's largely a misconception about the industry. And lastly, individuals also function as one-stop shops. We can handle every aspect of content creation. So I, for instance, independently manage my social media and the business's social media. And so from filming to editing and marketing, I do everything myself and from one device. And it doesn't take me long at all. It takes me a maximum of 20 to 30 minutes in order to create, edit, and upload content for both accounts. So when we look at this industry, it is extremely advantageous for women, offering many benefits. And so it's not surprising that women dominate this industry, making up 51.9% of content creators. Despite this dominance, however, women are facing significant disparities, particularly in economic equality. A survey conducted by Influencer Marketing Hub revealed a glaring wage gap. On average, male creators earn nearly double the salary of their female counterparts, and yet 78% of monetized content creators are women. The math there for me is so shocking. 78% of monetized content creators are women, and yet men still earn double what women are earning. And moreover, the access to technology and digital literacy further exacerbate the challenges faced by women in the digital realm. Statistics reveal that women are disproportionately disadvantaged in mobile phone ownership and usage, particularly in low and middle income countries. On average, women are 10% less likely to own a mobile phone, 26% less likely to own a smartphone, and 18% less likely to use the mobile internet. And these statistics are even more glaring in rural areas where there are wider gender gaps. And so these barriers, ranging from lower digital literacy to financial constraints, prevent many women from fully participating in the digital creative industry, despite its potential for economic empowerment and lifestyle flexibility. And so these challenges and disparities are what we as women who do have the facilities to exist in these spaces should be aiming to contribute to women who do not have the same facilities. And some ways we can do this is using the CREATE model. So the CREATE model encourages us to collaborate amongst girls from diverse backgrounds, fostering an environment where we can learn from different perspectives and experiences. For instance, a peer-to-peer program in which we can all exist as we are called to exist and hear from the various different perspectives of different women from different races and ethnicities, which brings us to the second point of representation. It is essential to ensure not only diverse representation with regard to the activities that women can do, but also in the role models. By reflecting the varied identities and backgrounds of all girls, we can promote inclusivity and empowerment, leading to the empowerment of young women and women in general to express ourselves creatively and confidently by providing opportunities to showcase our unique talents without the fear of judgment or discrimination. We also should consider the accessibility of various resources and programs which should be accessible to all girls, regardless of socioeconomic status, physical ability, or geographic location. And of course, we were talking about the glaring gaps with regard to digital literacy, and therefore training young women and women alike should be a priority to us as women who do have the facilities, so that we can equip girls with the skills, knowledge, and confidence to pursue their creative passions and ambitions. And lastly, we must advocate for equity with regard to access to resources, opportunities, and recognition, amplifying girls' voices from underrepresented groups to ensure that all perspectives are heard and valued. And so to conclude, today we reflected on various insights, and so I hope we can carry forward with a renewed sense of inspiration and determination in order to harness the creative industry and everything that it's worth, to embrace the tools and resources at our disposal, and to create a future where creativity knows no bounds and every voice is not only heard, but valued. So thank you so much for your time and for listening to me. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will look forward to your questions later on. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Gabriella. Ladies, we are hearing the young generation. I don't know what's the age group that has joined us, but I think I like those closing statements. How do we create an environment where every woman's voice is not only heard, but it is valued? That is so profound. There are key things that Gabriella has already shared, and I'm gonna start sharing the next presenter's screen. But I actually like the fact that, we have our smartphones, but what are we really using them for? I'm feeling very challenged right now by this presentation. Please continue to put your comments on the chat, put your questions on the chat. We will have a Q&A after the next speaker, but please continue to put your comments on the chat. As I've already seen there, somebody said it has been a really insightful, Gabby. Love it. Thank you so much. Let's move on to our next speaker. There's a lot that you have said. I'm trying to multi-skill here because I need to share the next screen, but at the same time, I also want to wrap up or share the thinking. Screen on for the next speaker. I like some of the key things that Gabriella said, that we need to embrace our authentic self. We need to embrace our authentic self as women. And one of the things she highlighted was about empathy, that we need to use empathy to foster connection as women. That for me was one of the profound things. Another thing that she spoke about was flexibility. How do we ensure, the creative industry gives us opportunity to be flexible while we play the different roles of mother, of businesswoman, and we can use this platform to actually have flexibility and create more income for ourselves. So that is super, super insightful. Now I'm going to hand over to Lindelwe Nxumalo, who is our next speaker. And she is a women's rights and gender studies specialist. And I know she's going to be like, wow, without introducing her. But we're going to hand over to her, and she's going to talk and give us more insight around how do we advance women agenda in different programs. And I'm not going to speak on her behalf, but let's hand over to Lindelwe Nxumalo as she takes us through this conversation. And please continue to put your comments on the chat, your questions on the chat. After her presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. And this is where I shut up and hand over to Linda. And you let me know to just continue with the slides. Happiness. Over to you.
Thank you so much, T. I appreciate it. Good morning, wonderful ladies of Courageous Women Arise, and guests who've joined us. It's a gorgeous, beautiful, sunny day in Joburg. Those are the kind of days I love. So celebrating Women's Day in a beautiful way. So as Tshepiso said, my name is Lindelwe Nxumalo. You can move on to the next slide, my friend. I have been working within can you hear me? You can move on to the next. There we go. I guess I wanted to start with, this is me. This is who I am. I'm a mom. I'm somebody who works. I'm a sister. I'm a partner to some absolutely amazing person. And so yeah, I live in Joburg. A fun fact about me is that I actually don't like the question of, tell me one fun thing about you. And I was reflecting on why. And I realized it's because I'm so curious about people that every time I have to ask that question, I'm like, no, I want to know more. Like, I want to know more about the dog that we heard about earlier. Why is the dog your best friend? Where did the dog come from? So ultimately, I always feel like this question is like, you know, when you watch a movie and don't see the end, I feel like this question is always that. So that's a very fun fact about myself. We can move on to the next slide. So I've been working and thinking about the question around women's rights and I guess the inclusion of women since I started my studies many years ago at the age of 18 or 19. And so I've really been challenged to think about how to share what this looks like, why it's important, where the value lies, in so many different spaces, in so many different ways, in so many different languages. And this means that, yes, experience, and in corporate speak, you would want to say expert. But what it means is that I'm constantly thinking and interested in ways to make this a reality and passionate about sharing this to others, because I truly believe that we're at a disadvantage when we don't include all who are invited to the table called life. So there's a quote that I really love a lot when we're talking about inclusion in all aspects. And the quote says, when you're accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression, equity feels like oppression. So the idea of creating space for others in a world where we have been taught that there isn't enough, there's not enough space, you've got to be the best or nothing. It can make others feel like there isn't enough room for other people, or, I only have enough space just to kind of manage being myself. And I think that's the lens at which I wanted to start this conversation today, to just get us thinking a little bit about that and our response to inclusion. We can move on to the next one, please. So where have I been doing this? Thought it'd be maybe a bit valuable to just share that I've been working in advocating and developing programs and looking at policy and within spheres of health for women, looking at freedom from violence, working on work around freedom from violence, talking about issues of economic justice, Even looking at transportation, various forms of transportation, from public transportation to safety transportation, and protecting women, even in the way they sit in a car, which is interestingly not always thought about. Looking at how young women are affected. So Gabby, I really, really enjoyed your presentation as well. I'm young at heart, but no longer in age. Looking at access to technology and what that looks like for women as well, just similar to what Gabby has presented. I've also been interested, and so a part of designing programs, policy for corporates, organizations at a national level, and also contributing to global policy reforms as far as this conversation around women being, invited to the table or at the table. And so, yeah, I just want to give you a little bit of background around that and what has helped to frame this journey of my thinking. So the first point I want to make is that I call this work women's work, not women's rights work, because I think when I say women's rights, it's framed in a particular way, and it can actually make people feel like, oh, I'm not really talking about laws. I'm not talking about, externally fighting and standing outside. But when I say women's work, it's the idea of just opening it up for anybody who's interested in having this conversation. Women's work is resistance work because it is about transformation. Please, can we move on to the next slide? And what are we transforming is the question. When I was thinking about the presentation for today and thinking around really talking about the importance and the value of including women, I wanted to go to the root of it because I'm a get to the roots kind of person, if you know me. I want to know what's at the crux of a thing. And just based on my own work and analysis and borrowing from other people and theories, what's at the root of the exclusion of women is the idea around gender. So the work to try and shift that, to change that, and to kind of build better ways or ways that are more inclusive is what we would call a gender transformative approach, right? So what is gender transformation? It is the effort to change social norms to address inequalities in power and in privilege between persons of different genders in order to free all people from harmful and destructive norms. Shifting and changing things that are obstructive for some actually frees all. It isn't this idea that many have that, oh, when you're fighting for women's rights, you're just fighting for women. The understanding is that if you think about the idea of equity, equity is the process of providing access for everybody to be able to be at the same level, right? That looks different for each person. But the thinking is, if you provide access for the person who is the least advantaged, everybody else along the spectrum actually gains. So if we're looking at it from a height perspective, you might have seen this picture where they show, and they're describing equity, and they show different people standing and trying to look over a wall. And you have short people, tall people, average people, all the different sizes. And equality is giving everybody one step, right? So everybody gets the same thing. And so everybody has one step, but the short person probably still can't see over the wall. The tall person just sees more. And then when you see the picture for equity, it shows that each person had various steps so that in the end, the shortest person sees just as well as the tallest person. And so that's what transformation looks like. Why should we do this? So gender, as we all know, is a social construct. It is something that is designed and built through our traditions, our customs, and our values. And in particular, when we talk about gender, it's something that's built around our understanding of sexes, right? Sexes is just our biological makeups as people, right? And then these constructs have been made to dictate around who we can be, how we should be, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. We often hear girls do this, boys shouldn't do this, or women do this and men don't do this. And even though it's not as prescribed now, probably in Gabby's day versus ours, it's still, even in the stats that she gave, we have this assumption that men make more money. Why do we assume that? It's such a random assumption, but it's there. When people say a doctor is coming, people are like, oh, what did he say? And you're like, oh, it was a she, you know, some of these subconscious sort of biases that have been built over time around who we can and can't be based on our physicality, are some of are things that, you know, as we grow and change as people, we realize some of them don't serve us. And so the process of shifting and changing that to spaces that serve us is what gender transformation is all about. We can move on to the next slide, please. So when we're talking about this kind of women's work and we're talking about engaging in gender transformation, now I just want to say that there's a spectrum of transformative acts, right? It's not all about being out in the streets and, you know, with a picket as I, you know, used to be. It's small things, standing up for other people, listening when others aren't listening, and asking different questions. In this journey, you encounter resistance. And I wanted to talk about this because I am actually, if you didn't know, inviting you to continue on this journey if you're already on it, and to bring you on board if you haven't. And I wanted to just frame a little bit around what happens when you do this, so that you're aware and you don't stop or get deterred, you know, or get kind of surprised about it. Doing women's work is, and doing work that is transformative, like all processes of change, inspire resistance. There's resistance that comes in from internally, right? Because all change starts with us. And then there's resistance that comes from the outside, right? And that is just resistance from others who are living with you, working with you, you know, in all the spaces, in your spaces of worship, in all the spaces where you interact, because we live inside of systems. And so what we see is that, you know, within that system, there are norms, there are values, there are things that are done, things that are not done. And once you start to deviate from that in any way, shape, or form, you start to get resistance from others, because people are like, what are you changing? Why are you changing? Don't change. We like the way things are, even if it's hard, because for many of us, you know, what is that saying? Better the devil we know, or the pain that we know is better than the pain that we don't know, you know, that kind of thing. We have internal resistance as well, because we are then suddenly faced with having to change our own minds, having to, you know, kind of shift how we're thinking and ask ourselves different and difficult questions around that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Yeah, so that was just my point there. When you choose to purposely advocate for the inclusion of women, you will encounter resistance. So I'm going to start with us, the internal part of it. The first thing that I often talk about is, you know, it's so important to start to reflect on the first step of the woman who was birthed in you. And what I mean by that is the very first time the concept of woman was kind of built inside of you. The idea of who woman is that rests inside of you. How you were introduced to woman, the concept impacts the woman you become. It creates the framing of who she is, who she can't or she can be, her boundaries, the expectations of her, who a good or a bad woman is or should be. And this lens creates an archetype that we either adhere to because it makes sense, and, you know, it has the same values we think we believe in, and also, you know, we want to reflect positively that picture that we've been given. Or we reject because either it doesn't fit, or we feel like it's, you know, it's narrow, or we realize that actually it doesn't work for us, or we're just like, we don't want to be like that woman, so we want to be different. So we kind of like rebel, right? Whatever the reasons for rejection. And sometimes we grapple with it because we're trying to understand who we are, who we want to be, what we think we should be, what we think we shouldn't be. But there's this concept of her, and she exists in your mind. And this is not just true of women. It is also true of men and people of other genders. That concept of who woman is the same concept of who man is, and the same concept. And so we carry that, and that's the lens that we then use to face the world. And so it then also influences how we think other women should be. It's a subconscious kind of thinking, right? A bias that influences us, right? And for many of us, that bias comes from the lens that we kind of live in the world, right? That is influenced by patriarchy. And patriarchy is not a man. PS, it's a system. It's a system that doesn't value women, just as Tshepiso gave examples of how there were prayers, oh my goodness, prayers around, thank God I'm not a woman. Where did those thoughts come from? That's the thinking behind the system that undermines and devalues women. That's expressed in many different ways. I want to really clarify that, because I know particularly in church spaces, as soon as you say patriarchy, they're like, oh, she will not submit as a wife, jokes. But I know that it brings up all sorts of feelings. It's really, what I'm addressing is not a person, it's a system, because the system also affects different types of men. There are some men who are not like, hey, me daughter, I am a man. And other men think, oh my God, he's a sissy, or whatever that they think. And so it limits the expressions of who those people can be as well. So I just wanted to say that real quick. And so coming back to this point, this then, all of this thinking, this understanding, how we've been exposed to who women is, how we've lived as women, how we believe women should be or shouldn't be, plays out in how we relate to each other, right? Some of the ways in which patriarchy has negatively influenced how as women relate to each other is, for example, competitiveness between women, And I know you guys are holy women, so you guys know nothing about this, but those other women, when like other women walk in and they're like, woo, what is she wearing? Or like, oh my God, who's better? Or like, she's not as professional, or like, whatever that competitive looks like, oh, she's more successful than the other person, or, she speaks better, whatever that competitiveness is that doesn't call for friendship, but rather calls for adversarial, that is a root, coming out of patriarchy, because the belief is that there can only be one woman and everybody should aspire to be her. And so there's no room for all the other expressions of womanhood. And so another example is how we're vigilant around, each other, and not in a positive way. How, bodies, Tshepiso was talking earlier, how there's always, comparison around bodies, dress, life choices, all of these things that we do within, each other's friend groups. We'll often hear that people say women can't make great friends. This is both true and not true, right? Because many of you have amazing women friends, but many of you have had relationships that are difficult with other women because of some of these factors. And so it's a complex reality. Please, let's move on to the next point. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I talk a lot. I will try to stick to my notes. And so because we are on a faith platform, I really wanted to connect this back to our beliefs, right? So when we start with yourself, the reality is that you cannot give what you do not have. It begins with us. And this is a basic, yet real principle that, whatever, you can't give up what you don't have. So we must persist on the continuous journey of healing our inner woman, right? To be full of the knowledge that you are loved by God, you are worthy. This creates a foundation that allows you to see that in others and to see it for others, right? And I've taken that from Mark 12, 31, which I was reading it, when I was preparing for this, and I was like, wow, this, I have always read it differently. But it's actually like, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Like, that's exactly what will happen. Not, not as an invitation. It's like, how you love yourself is how you're going to love others. How you, treat yourself is how you're going to treat others. It's a principle. And so it's also an invitation to say, okay, how do I review that? It isn't easy to love others if you yourself aren't loved. And if you don't love the woman inside of you, it's hard to love the women around you. The second one is, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I've taken it from Matthew chapter 17, but it's also in Luke chapter 6, verse 45. And what the whole verse talks about is that what you have internally is what eventually comes out of your mouth. So what is full inside of you is what will be expressed. So what are we filling ourselves in, and what we think about ourselves as women, ourselves as other women? And it's not possible to be inclusive of other people and think about bringing other people in if you yourself don't feel included, worthy, able to create that space, right? And so, yeah, it's a journey towards loving me, and not in this kind of, very I don't know, commercialized way that we make it now, where it's like, yes, hashtag love me myself. I mean, the hashtags are great. That's not the point. It is about a journey of continuing to accept and to know yourself, and to allow God inside of that, because we only learn to love yourself when you see how God loves you. And so it needs that that continuous loop. God, you allow God to love you. You see how God loves you. That creates love for yourself, and you're able to then give it to others. It's a continuous journey around our, whole lives and in every which way that we are. So yeah, can we move on to the next slide, please? And so that basis and foundation creates the possibility for inclusion, right? It then becomes a natural extension of what the world should look like, because when you're full of that love and knowledge that you are deeply loved, you are seen, you are provided for, you are worthy, there is more than enough, you are able to be fully who you are without, the fear of not being loved, because God creates that rock, that foundation. You then look at the world and you're like, oh my goodness, I want to hear what other people have to say. We need to have that other person in the room. What are they thinking? Why aren't they here? It almost becomes a natural evolution, because you realize the abundance that exists, and that abundance requires difference. And, God has created difference and variation in skin and color and language in the ways in which we are for a reason. What is that reason, So we choose to agree with God's intention for diversity, difference, and color of all. And by color, I just mean diversity. So race included, yes, but I just mean the different ways in which we are. If we imagine ourselves like this makeup color palette, each person is a color, and we do this. So how do we do this? We can do this by honoring. I weighed together and I thought to myself, I've always struggled with International Women's Day or any Women's Day. And as a women's rights person working in that industry for like over a decade, Women's Day is to women's rights workers what year end is to finance people, I suppose, and pitches are or activations are to marketing people. You get my point. And every year I really felt conflicted, because there's all this women, and then every single day there's a dishonoring and a devaluing of women in how we exist. I felt like it's such a weird flux. At the same time, you want to be thankful that the other women went before, and so you want to honor that they wanted a day recognized because of what was worked hard for. So it's like, I want to recognize the work that women have done and are doing, because there's so many people who are, invested in this work. And yet I don't like the way in which we then use it as though it's enough. Like, you had your Women's Day, back to work, how do we take that into our everyday life? Anyway, long story just to say, so in my mind, I began to see it as the difference between honoring and celebrating. You can use celebrating as a way of honor, but what honor does is that it recognizes the glory in others. And so when I recognize God in something or in someone, right, I honor them, right? I show value to it, because it reveals and it reflects or points to the nature, attributes, and the power of God. And that valuing is what creates true worth. That valuing is also what creates the opportunities to, what Gabby said, have empathy, listen, wait, and want people in the room. Celebrating can very often just be left at the surface, right? It can be really used as window dressing, just as I've done in my last example. It can be a powerful tool for change, but on its own, it can just be, what is it? Yeah, shallow, that's the term. Let's move on to the next slide, please. And so I thought, what are some practical steps, and now bringing it just into action so we can do this. This is a really interesting site. It's called Catalyst. Please look it up. These words are too small, but I just wanted to put it there. There are so many different examples, because people often ask me, how do I do this at work? How do I do this at home? How do I do this in my place of worship? And I wanted to first focus on our frame of heart, our frame of mind, because that is actually what will inform conscious, awakened, and intentional decision-making around inclusion, because inclusion is intentional. And so, one of the things I always say is that exclusion is intentional. And people be like, no, it's not true. But when systems are designed without thinking for people, the systems produce what that thinking was. And if that thinking excludes others, it was intentionally designed like that. Not intentional to be bad or intentional to be good, just intentional. And so this is an invitation for that intentionality towards inclusion. The work that I do often, we often talk about how, in order to be aware of this, you need to be awake that it's happening. And in order to remain awake, you need to want to remain awake, because the reality is that inclusion is great as a concept, but really is actually just hard work. And if you're involved in anything that has to do with change, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's about rethinking, how do we approach this? How do we make sure this person isn't there? But one of the easiest kind of cheat sheets I use is that the critical work, or the work around transformative change, and the critical work that's done around inclusion is a work around asking questions. Who is in the room? Who isn't in the room? Why are they not in the room? Who holds the power? Who doesn't hold the power? Why are we not listening to certain people and listening to other people? How do we bring other people in? What do we need to do to make sure they remain in? And it's something that Gabby spoke about, that oftentimes we want to give women positions of power, and then we want to be like, she wasn't able to, she failed. But she maybe was a mother or responsible for some sort of home care. She comes from a different background. She's never led more than 2 people in her life, and every leadership she's ever seen looks like a man. And so all the things around were not built in order to support her. And so how do we intentionally do that without just saying we gave her a title and so now she's going to win? It's not a thing. So some other practical examples are: ask advice from those you wouldn't usually ask. So whether it's in a place of worship setting, who are you not asking? Why are you not asking them? Support the ideas of those who are often sidelined. Why are they sidelined? What do they have to say? Everybody on the palette is important. So what is it that they have to say that we haven't heard? Then there's small things, around humor. Don't laugh at jokes that don't honor others. We often make fun of women in many ways, particularly on social media. Anything around women's behavior that isn't seen correct, we're laughing at it. Oh my God, she looks like such a hoe. Apologies if that's a swear word in this space, but you get what I'm trying to say. Those things dishonor the people that we claim to want to include. Question policies or processes that oppress others. And be on the journey of then trying to be a part of the solution. So don't just stop at questioning. Questioning is just the door. To live and stay in the room and eventually make it to the other side is committing to then finding those answers. And that's it. Thank you so much. I think that's my last slide, T. Yes, it is. Thank you so much. I wanted to take the opportunity to speak around inclusion in the way that I have, because I wanted it to be useful to frame whatever aspect you're coming in, whether you're at work, whether you're at home, whether you run your own business, whatever that looks like. But I also do speak quite specifically on those things if you're interested. And so these are my details, but I'll also share the presentation if it's useful to Tshepiso so that you can have it. Thank you.
Awesomeness. Thank you so much. That was so insightful. You have to keep your video on. Can I also have Gabriella to keep the video on? Probably we'll just take 1 or 2 questions. I know that we're all out of time, but we need to, give this a bit of conversation before we land. The good thing is that we have this recorded, so those who need to jump off, I'm aware that people would need to jump off, given that in South Africa, it's not a public holiday like it used to many, many years ago. So for those who are joining us globally, I'm sure it is a public holiday and they're happy to stay. But let us then bring this conversation closer. There's a lot that you've just said. I wish I wasn't facilitating, so as I can just absorb the wisdom and the knowledge and a lot of things that I needed to reflect on as both of you were talking. But maybe before I take the questions on the on the chat, and we will just check the chat if there were any specific questions. And I think it goes back to what you said, Lynn, around sometimes as women, I think you made, I've made making so many notes now, I've lost my train of thought. That there is a sense of competitiveness that we women have that does not invite friendship, but adversity. I thought that was just like profound. And I want to take that conversation further around how can we as women inspire inclusion amongst each other? Because it sounds like, and I know you've touched on some of them in your practical steps, but what can you say? What can we do to actually inspire inclusion as women amongst ourselves? That is the question I'd like to pose to you. Yeah.
Sorry, is that to both of us? Or
Yeah.
to
So,
me?
but yeah, it's a follow up to you first, Lynn, and then we'll
Oh,
go
to
to
me
the young.
first.
Yeah.
Practically. Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
So I was piggybacking on the quote you made, that women, we tend to be competitive, and that does not include, it doesn't encourage or invite friendship. And I'm saying, as we're talking about inclusion as a bigger umbrella, what can we do to inspire inclusion amongst ourselves as women?
Be curious. The thing that you think you want to compete about, be curious about it. Ask the person, whatever that thing is. I think I made random examples around looks or delivery of something. Be curious and open, and don't allow that kind of spirit of competitiveness to rise up. See it for what it is, and then just be curious around that, and be open. Sounds very, I know, simple, but it's profound.
Yeah, be curious. Let's go back to childlike mindset, where you're just curious and you just want to meet someone. That was profound. Gabriella, we're talking to young women out there. What can you do in this generation, as a new generation, to inspire inclusion amongst your generation, I guess, yeah, for young women and girls?
I think we have been given many opportunities by the former generations. I think specifically millennials have done a lot in order to provide opportunities for a younger woman. Of course, not every younger woman, but if I consider my interest, for instance, if I take my personal life in technology, in social media, it came from my mom. My mom was like, Gabby, what is Instagram about? Gabby, you have such a nice personality. Why don't you go look into becoming a YouTuber? And when I was 16, she encouraged me to start a YouTube channel. And so I think for me, you know, Auntie Tshepiso, you always talk about the sphere of influence. I think looking at younger women within your sphere of influence, as whether you are millennials or not, you know, looking at women around you and saying, you know, this is a strength of hers. You know, Lynn, you were talking about like the fact that we should be curious about the things we are competing with other women about, but also looking at, if you're competing with them, they are good at something. So if you're competing with them because they have a good personality, then they could be a voice for women, they could be a voice for young women. And so recognizing the potential around you and not allowing your competitiveness or jealousy to stop you from advancing other women and encouraging them to pursue things that you know they could be a success at. So I would say through observing those around you and encouraging them in the things that you observe them to be good at or excelling at.
Thank you, Gabriella. I see there are questions in the chat. I can't scroll for some for my life of me. Lynn, do you mind to just probably check if there are any questions that are coming directly? I can see the producer has said that there are some questions, but I'm struggling on my side to open some questions directly. My laptop is misbehaving right now.
I see the first one was for Gabby. And it was, what is your advice for young Christian women who want to get started with content creation? Is there a formula? How does one produce original material? And what are the things to consider or be wary of? So that one was for Gabby.
Happiness, thank you.
So in terms of advice, thank you for your question. In terms of advice for young Christian women, so I am a young Christian woman who is getting started with content creation. And the one thing that I do, whether it makes me uncomfortable or not, is I am not quiet about my faith. So in my bio, I have the cross there because I'm not even being subtle about who I believe in. I believe in Jesus Christ. That is who I subscribe to. And in my videos, for instance, the audios that I choose to use are audios that glorify God. In fact, most, if not all of the audios that I use on my Instagram and TikTok and Facebook are Christian songs, but are modern Christian songs. So I don't know if it's kind of like hip hop rap, but it's Christian hip hop rap. And so it's from Christian artists, it's gospel music, it's gospel instrumentals that I use. And so I'm not pushing my faith to you to say convert or you're going to hell, but I am, providing a space where you can be comfortable as a Christian, and also a space where you can experience who God is. And so I think it's not being quiet about your faith, not trying to think like, oh, well, I'm not going to trend if I say I believe in Jesus and things like that, because the verse of the day the other day was, every good and perfect gift comes from the Lord. And so if it is God's will for you to trend, if it's God's will for you to be famous on these platforms, that's what's going to happen, regardless of what you are uploading. So is there a formula? I don't follow a specific formula. There are certain formulas in terms of like templates and things that you can use. There's various ways you can edit reels and things like that, or shorts, I'm sure you see on Facebook and YouTube, that is more eye-catching, using good lighting where you can, and trying to make sure your quality is really good. In terms of original material, I think original material is a subjective concept, because it depends on what's original to you. Lynn was talking about our concept of a woman and how that idea of a woman was birthed. I think even in what material you decide to put out, it is what is original to you, what makes you happy, what makes you passionate. Because if I want to say there's a formula, it's not getting tired of what you're doing. So the second you get tired of, oh, I'm so sick and tired of baking every single day, but baking wasn't even your passion in the first place, technology is your passion. And so if you go in line with what you're passionate about, because I believe our calling also rests in our desires and passions, because the Lord gives us the desires of our hearts. And so I believe he's blessed us with various passions. And so even in that, considering what has God blessed me with, can I sing? Not really, but I can dance. So let me lean into the skills and the talents that God has given me. So I hope that answers your question.
Happiness. Thank you so much, Gabby. Was there any other question there, Lynn, that was on the chat? Yeah.
There was 2 in 1, really, people interested in kind of understanding how to monetize on digital platforms, and any advice that Gabby would have around that. So there was kind of 2 questions talking about it.
Okay.
Thank you for your question again. So monetizing, I understand it's quite difficult on social media, but with regard to monetizing, it also has to do with algorithms. So algorithms is, for instance, I'm scrolling and I keep liking photos of puppies, then that's all that's going to come up on my feed. Maybe I'll get one picture of a kitten, but if I don't like it, the algorithm picks up on that. And so what you need to do is show up in people's algorithms. What this means is posting consistently. Whether you choose like, okay, every Monday and Tuesday I'm going to post. So for me, I have a business, not a business, but I'm running the social media page of a business, and I post for them every Tuesday and Thursday. I post on my personal accounts every Wednesday and Friday. And from this, in the past few days, I've gained followers from that. I've gained subscribers from that. And I really haven't done anything new other than posting, except that I posted consistently. But if you want to look at monetizing quickly, you can look at affiliate marketing. Affiliate marketing is a way in which you can utilize digital platforms to promote businesses. It's almost acting as a brand ambassador, but you provide a link. For instance, let's say I want to sell hand sanitizer, then I make a blog about, okay, cleanliness, hygiene, hand sanitizer. Here's a link where you can go and buy the hand sanitizer. And then every time somebody clicks on that link and goes to buy hand sanitizer, you get a percentage of the commission. So that's one way. Another way is quite new. It's called UGC. This one, you don't really need to create blogs and things like that, just an Instagram page where you reach out to, there are various businesses which do use UGC, and it's basically just promoting, and you don't need to have a lot of followers, you don't need to have thousands of followers for this, just even if you have 200, it's fine. But you promote the business on your Instagram. So you'll post pictures of their clothes or if they, whatever they're doing. And the last thing is through, there's not the last thing, there's many other ways, but these are the ones I'll touch on, is brand deals. If you DM on Instagram or on Facebook, if you send a message on Twitter, you can DM people. Various companies, there are some that work with smaller brands. For example, there's a brand called Chamberlain Coffee, where if you just send them a DM like, hi, I'm interested in being a brand ambassador for you. This is my creative portfolio. Your creative portfolio would consist of what you have done, your previous posts, previous videos, and things like that. And, you know, just posting that on your kind of DM, putting it in a document maybe, and sending it to them saying, this is what I've done. I'm interested in being a brand ambassador. And now trying to break into the job market, you know, they say getting a job is a full-time job. It really is. Even getting a brand deal is a full-time job. And so just looking, you know, let me DM this person, DM that person. I was speaking about Tyler earlier. She would tag Black Coffee, Nasty C, everyone in her videos and things like that. She would send her videos to these celebrities saying, please will you promote my story and things like that. And then she ended up touring with Chris Brown. So, you know, just trying to remain consistent, reaching out to people and praying, I think, is the most important thing for a breakthrough, because as well, and a breakthrough where God wants you to, because I think many people who are in the working environment will tell you that not every job is your job. You know, there's a job that God ordained for you. So don't get lost wandering for 40 years when you could be in the promised land. So trusting God with those opportunities. I hope I answered your question well.
Awesomeness. Thank you so much. So we're going to bring this to a landing. I'm going to allow Lynn to just say her closing remarks, and then Gabriella will say her closing remarks, and then we bring this to a landing. Your last thoughts there, Lynn, as we bring this to a landing.
Thanks so much, T, and the Women of Courageous Women Arise for the opportunity just to share a little bit about what I'm passionate about. I know that a lot of people were asking around practical steps. We'll have to continue that conversation another day. But I think the most important part is if you are authentic to who you are, and you're authentic in God, and you walk out your life led by the Spirit, these things will come naturally. And one day somebody will come to you and say, oh my goodness, you are dismantling the patriarchy. Because there is not a path that God would lead you that would ever support the oppressing of others, the exclusion of others, and the devaluing of anybody's life. God is for people. To love God is to love people. And so that's my final thought. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Gabriella, your last thoughts.
I just want to say I'm so sad we didn't get to answer Lynn's questions. There were some there that were really good. I really enjoyed her presentation.
Really? Oh, okay. What are the questions?
Yeah, there were a few for her. There was one, I think. Yes. On the question of the patriarchy and how it has often been linked to misogyny and toxic masculinity, often there's much to be said about women doing better and not being informed by misogyny when regarding other women. But how do we create positive masculinity for men? What does that look like in practice? Is it men? Is it just men who provide for women, men who don't abuse women, or does it go beyond that?
That's a good question. Okay, thank you for that, Gabriella. This mending chat thing is frustrating me. I can't see the questions. Apologies for that. You have to answer that one, Lynn. Please. Thank you for that, Gabby.
Thanks, Gabby. I was actually excited that I didn't have to answer the questions because I think the answers are complex. I think people are asking really, really complex questions that are actually not simple answers, right? And I wouldn't want to cheat by just answering it, kind of haphazardly. However, I think in the same way that we're talking about, creating, woman through a godly lens, it's the same as it creating man through a godly lens as well. I think a lot of the tropes that we use around what a good man is, even in the church, are distorted because we often don't look at the entirety of the word. Like if you read Proverbs from the beginning to the end, the picture of what a good man or what a man should be is absolutely clear. It goes far beyond providing. It goes far beyond just the role as the head. It talks to character. It talks to speech. It talks to values and all of those things. So I don't like to use those things against each other because there's that bad man, good man concept, because we know sometimes that the provider can be abusive, and the abuser can be actually a really great boss. So what do you do with that? But I think, if I'm just going to crystallize it, I can't say enough about, particularly this is I think a Christian space, so you can use, a spiritual lens. And what I love about a spiritual lens is that it elevates us, right? It takes us to another realm of different possibilities. When you're living within this space, it's hard to kind of imagine it. But if you transcend and you believe that it's possible with God, you're able then to even begin to imagine something different and to partner with God to create something different. And that looks at reviewing how, we approach, even as men, how, a man would approach himself as being a man and what that means and what that looks like. What does God say about that? It looks like choosing not to align with what looks like power in the way that it's been kind of constructed in the world that we live in, which often looks like very destructive forms of power, abusive forms of power, or I'm going to do something for you because you're going to owe me later. And using that privilege in a way that doesn't benefit others. And like I said, it's not just women and men, it is also the ways in which other men use that around other men and making other men feel less because of what they may or may not have, what they may or may not look like, their past, their future, and all of those sorts of things. And so for me, the mindset is important because, as Tshepiso as a coach will tell you, you can't change anything if your mind isn't changed. So I always don't like to just give actions, because then actions make you feel like I did it, so it's fine. No, it is important to have a very clear, deliberate internal reflection and allow the actions to come from there so that they remain consistent, and then you'll begin to see change in you and in change around you. The work that I've done for so long, my friends around me will often, if somebody says something about a woman or people from the LGBTQI community or people living with disabilities, they immediately look at me because they know I'm going to respond, not because I always respond, but because it's been something I've thought about so deeply, I care about so intimately, that any conversation that dishonors others, immediately I'm like, I can't be a part of that conversation. And this is something that I've practiced, thought about, and tried to live by the grace of God continuously throughout my life. So allow the actions to come from an internal place, and then allow your actions to become consistent once you align them to real good values. Thank you.
Awesome. I would swear, I always say that I'd swear, Lynn, whenever you speak, at first value, somebody would think this one is not of faith. And then you speak and elevate the conversation. It's a game changer. I always appreciate how God is using you in this space to just bring this conversation. Thank you so much. I think in the interest of time, I wouldn't want to stretch this. I saw a comment, I think somebody put a comment around, this is a topic that we need in this Christian space, in this Christian space around inclusion. It's not a once-off, but I think there's a lot that is hidden in this conversation. And I think as courageous women arise, we will definitely take this conversation further. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Gabby, I'm going to give you your last thoughts as you share your last thinking as we just do our announcement as we bring this to a wrap. Please share your last thoughts there, Gabby, as we wrap up.
I just wanted to say thank you again for the opportunity, Auntie Tshepiso. I mean, this is really what inclusion looks like, is you giving me this opportunity regardless of my age, regardless of my experience. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much to Lynn. I really learned so much. You think you know about feminism as a feminist, or you think you know about women as a woman, but you really don't. And I have learned so much from you, and it's made me want to research many concepts further. And the same for Auntie Tshepiso. Thank you so much. In the beginning, you were talking about how Jesus dignifies women, and really encouraged my spirit. So thank you to everyone. I hope everyone's enjoyed it, and I really learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you very much for attending this session today. It is and it was insightful. Thank you so much. I see a comment now. The comment thing is coming out. Very insightful from all the speakers. Thank you so much. And the practical examples of inclusion, simple, practical, and yet powerful if we practice them. Thank you so much for that comment there, Martha. So if you want to be part of this community, please join us. You can follow us on Instagram, CWRIs, or you can look us up on Facebook. We have a podcast called Courage Everyday Podcast. Or if you need any information around Courageous Women Arise, you can email us cwris.events@gmail.com or cwris.info@gmail.com. And we have our monthly Connect platform happening. Our next coffee chat will be happening on the 23rd of March. And please email if you need more clarity. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have an amazing, fantastic International Women's Day, and may God bless you. Thank you so much. Bye.